By the time Nora Quinn finished the east wing on the third floor of the Ashworth estate, it was past 2 in the morning, and her feet had stopped feeling like they belonged to her sometime around midnight. She'd picked up a second shift to cover for Delphine, who'd gone home with a fever, and a third shift after that because the household manager had looked at her with the particular desperation of a woman who knew Nora couldn't afford to say no. Nora never said no. She'd learned, in the 8 months since she'd started working for Weston Ashworth, that saying no to anything at Ashworth House tended to end careers faster than saying yes to everything tended to end backs. And her back, currently, was losing that argument badly. She was supposed to finish in the servants' wing, a narrow corridor of small rooms on the 4th floor that smelled permanently of lemon polish and old radiator heat. But somewhere between the linen closet and the back stairs, her exhaustion had curdled into a kind of fog. The specific fog of a woman who has been awake for 20 hours and can no longer entirely trust her own feet. She remembered climbing a staircase. She remembered a door that seemed, in the dark, like the door to her own small room, plain and unmarked the way all the staff doors were. And she remembered the extraordinary, sinful comfort of a mattress that did not feel anything like the thin, lumpy one she usually collapsed onto, and after that she remembered nothing at all. Because she had fallen asleep the way people fall asleep in fairy tales, instantly and completely, and it did not occur to her, in the last conscious seconds before the dark took her, to wonder why her narrow servant's bed suddenly smelled of cedar and expensive linen. She woke to the sound of a door opening and a voice that had haunted every staff meeting for 8 months, going very, very quiet. "Explain to me," said Weston Ashworth, in the tone of a man doing violence to his own composure by remaining calm at all, "why there is a member of my housekeeping staff asleep in my bed." Nora sat bolt upright so fast the room spun. The bed beneath her was not her bed. The room around her was not her room. It was vast and gray-toned and hung with the kind of art that probably cost more than her mother's entire house. And the man standing in the doorway in a half-untied robe, staring at her with an expression somewhere between fury and disbelief, was not a coworker she could apologize to and forget by breakfast. He was the owner of the house. He was, in point of fact, the man who had fired 2 housekeepers in the time she'd worked there for offenses considerably smaller than sleeping in his bed uninvited at 3 in the morning. "I am so sorry," Nora said, scrambling upright, pulling her cardigan tight around herself, as if that might somehow retroactively make the last 4 hours not have happened. I must have taken a wrong turn. The doors on the 4th floor all looked the same in the dark, and I was so tired. And you didn't even notice you'd walked into the master suite." Weston's voice had gone flat. The particular flatness of a man deciding how angry to allow himself to be. "Through 2 locked doors. The east one sticks. It doesn't latch properly. I've told maintenance twice." She stopped herself, aware that defending the state of his door locks was not, currently, the most useful use of her breath. "I'll go. I'm so sorry." "Please don't. I need this job, Miss Ashworth. I'll go right now and it will never." "Sit down. I really think it's better if I, Miss Quinn." He said her name the way he said everything, like a decision already made, and something in the certainty of it made her sit back down on the edge of the enormous bed without meaning to. He crossed the room, not toward her but toward the window, and stood there for a moment with his back to her, and when he spoke again some of the fury had drained out of his voice, replaced by something more tired and considerably more human. "How many shifts have you worked today?" 3, Nora admitted, because lying to him had never once worked out well for anyone on staff, and because she was too exhausted to construct a better answer. "Delphine's out sick." "Mrs. " Farrow asked, and I said yes, because Because you always say yes. He turned around, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not in 8 months of watching him stride through the house, issuing instructions like a man who owned time itself. I've watched you do that since the day you started. You say yes to everything, and then you disappear into walls I didn't know had doors in them. And apparently, eventually, you fall asleep in my bed rather than admit you can't take one more flight of stairs. He said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse, because it meant he'd actually been paying attention. How long has this been happening? The triple shifts? A few months, Nora said quietly. Mrs. Farrow's short-handed since the Kowalski sisters left. It's fine. I don't mind the extra hours. Even as she said it, she heard how threadbare it sounded. The automatic reassurance of someone who has said it so many times to so many people that it no longer required thought. You don't mind working yourself into a state where you can't tell your own bedroom from mine. That's not. She stopped, because it was, in fact, exactly that, and there was no version of the sentence that ended anywhere better. I'll speak to Mrs. Farrow. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I really am very sorry, sir. I know this looks. It looks like my housekeeping staff is being run into the ground and nobody thought to mention it to me. He said this the way he said everything about the business side of his life. Briskly, as though identifying the actual problem was simply the first item on a list of things to fix. And for a moment, Nora forgot to be embarrassed and was, instead, faintly astonished. In 8 months, she had built an entire private mythology around Weston Ashworth as a man who noticed nothing beneath the level of quarterly earnings. And here he was, at 3 a.m, more troubled by her exhaustion than by the fact that she'd been asleep in his bed. You don't have to do anything, she said. I don't want to get Mrs. Farrow in trouble. She's not a bad person, she's short-staffed, and the budget, I'm well aware of the budget. I sign it. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, and for the first time she noticed how tired he looked too, the particular exhaustion of a man who had probably also been awake far too many hours, though for entirely different reasons. Sit there. I'm not going to bite your head off for a door that doesn't lock properly and a schedule I should have looked at months ago. I really should go back to my room. Your room, which I'm now told has a door that doesn't latch, at 3 a.m, after the night you've apparently had. He said it dryly, but there was something underneath the dryness that made her look at him properly for the first time since she'd woken. Not as the household's most feared employer, but as a man standing in his own bedroom in the middle of the night looking, unexpectedly, concerned. Stay. I'll have Mrs. Farrow reassign your room in the morning, and in the meantime you're not walking back to a door that won't lock at this hour, because I've decided to have a crisis about it. Sir, I can't stay in your... There's a guest room through that door that hasn't been used since my sister visited at Christmas. You'll sleep there. I'll sleep here, alone, as I generally do. And in the morning we'll discuss why exactly my staff are working themselves unconscious without my knowledge. He said it in the tone of a man closing a negotiation rather than opening one, and Nora, who had spent 8 months learning that arguing with Weston Ashworth once he'd decided something was roughly as productive as arguing with weather, found she didn't have the energy left to try. The guest room, when she let herself be led to it, was smaller than the master suite, but still larger than any room she'd ever slept in. Done in soft blues with a window that looked out over the dark shape of the gardens, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment after he left, still not entirely convinced the last 20 minutes had happened, rather than being some elaborate exhaustion fever dream. She did not, in fact, expect to see him again before some formal dismissal arrived by way of Mrs. Farrow sometime after sunrise. She was wrong. He found her the next morning in the kitchen, hours before most of the house was awake, nursing a cup of tea she'd made with hands that hadn't fully stopped shaking, and he set a folder on the counter in front of her without preamble. "Your new schedule," he said. "Approved as of an hour ago. 2 shifts a day, maximum. 5 days a week, and a rotation system so nobody covers more than one person's absence at a time. I've also asked Mrs. Farrow to hire 2 more staff, effective immediately, since apparently we've been running this house on people saying yes when they should be saying no." Nora stared at the folder, then at him, entirely unsure what to do with either. "You didn't have to do that because of me. I didn't do it because of you," he said, which stung for exactly as long as it took him to continue. "I did it because I found out at 3 in the morning that the people keeping this house running are being worked past the point of good sense, and that's a management failure, not a personal favor. You were simply the one unfortunate enough to fall asleep somewhere I'd notice." He paused, and something shifted in his face, some of the brisk certainty softening into something more careful. "Though I'll admit the manner of finding out could have been less dramatic. I really am sorry about that part. I've decided to be flattered instead of angry. My bed came recommended, apparently, even unconscious." It took her a full 3 seconds to realize he'd made a joke, and the surprise of it startled a laugh out of her before she could stop it, which seemed to please him more than anything else that had happened in the last 12 hours, judging by the small, unguarded smile that crossed his face and vanished just as quickly. Like a man not entirely used to being caught doing it. "For what it's worth," she said, "your mattress really is excellent. I'll pass the compliment along to whoever I bought it from." He lingered by the counter longer than the conversation strictly required, and Nora, watching him not quite leave, found herself in the strange position of not wanting him to. "Can I ask you something?" she said, mostly to fill the silence before it stretched into something she didn't know how to name yet. "Why did you actually come find me this morning? You could have sent Mrs. Farrow with the folder and never spoken to me again." He considered the question longer than she expected, turning his own cup of coffee slowly on the counter. "Because I spent most of last night thinking about how long you must have been running on empty before your body simply gave out in the nearest available bed, and it bothered me a great deal more than it should have, for an employer receiving a routine staffing update." He glanced up at her. "I'm not entirely sure what to do with that information yet. I thought bringing the folder myself might buy me a little more time to work it out." That's a very roundabout way of checking on someone. "I own a company that manufactures precision instruments, and I still can't manage a conversation without turning it into a project with deliverables," he admitted. And there was something disarming in the honesty of it, an unguardedness she suspected very few people at Ashworth House ever got to see. Old habit. "Feel free to point it out whenever it happens again." "I intend to," Nora said, and meant it, and something about the ease with which the words came out surprised her more than anything that had happened at 3 in the morning. In the weeks that followed, the new schedule held, and the 2 new hires arrived, and the door on the east side of the 4th floor got a lock that actually latched, and none of that explained why Weston Ashworth kept appearing in the kitchen at odd hours when Nora happened to be there, or why he'd started asking, with a casualness that fooled absolutely no one on staff, whether she'd slept enough, whether the new schedule suited her, whether she'd like the guest room permanently, since the 4th floor plumbing was, he claimed, in need of extensive and suspiciously convenient repairs. Mrs. Farrow noticed first, the way she noticed everything, and said nothing beyond a raised eyebrow that spoke volumes. The rest of the staff noticed shortly after, in the particular way household staff notice everything about the people who employ them, with quiet amusement, and a betting pool Nora was fairly sure she wasn't meant to know about. Nora noticed last of all, or pretended to, because admitting she'd started listening for his footsteps in the hallway felt like admitting to something considerably more dangerous than falling asleep in the wrong bed. It was Mrs. Farrow who finally said it aloud, cornering her in the linen closet with the directness of a woman who had run this house for 20 years and had no patience left for pretending. He hasn't looked at the household budget himself in a decade, and now he reads it line by line every month. You know why that is. I have no idea what you're implying, Nora said, folding a towel with more attention than the towel required. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you the man rewired his entire management structure because a maid fell asleep in his bed by accident. And he still hasn't stopped finding reasons to be in whatever room you're in. Mrs. Farrow softened, just slightly, the way she did when she'd decided a lecture had made its point. For what it's worth, Nora, he was a different man before you started here. Colder. I don't think it's an accident, whatever he tells himself it is. Nora didn't answer, because the honest answer required admitting things she hadn't fully admitted to herself yet. The way her chest had gone tight the morning he'd set that folder on the counter without asking anything of her in return. The way his rare, unguarded smile had started living somewhere behind her ribs and refused to leave. She found him that evening on the terrace, looking out over gardens gone violet in the last of the light, and she stood beside him for a while without either of them saying anything, because some conversations announce themselves before the words arrive. I owe you an apology, Weston said finally, without turning. Not for the bed. For not noticing sooner what this house was doing to the people running it. It shouldn't have taken an accident to make me look. You looked eventually, Nora said. That's more than most people manage. I keep finding excuses to be near the kitchen at odd hours, he said. And there was something almost boyish in the admission, entirely at odds with the reputation that preceded him through every room in this house. I'm told my staff have started a betting pool about it. I've heard rumors, Nora admitted. Would it complicate things terribly if I told you the excuses were never really about the schedule? Nora looked at him properly then, at the man who had rewritten an entire household's operations because a stranger had fallen asleep somewhere she shouldn't have, who noticed exhaustion in people other men in his position never bothered to see, and found that the fear she'd carried into that bedroom at 3 a.m. had, somewhere in the weeks since, quietly turned into something else entirely. It would complicate my job description considerably, she said. I'm still not sure that's a reason to say no. Good, Weston said, and for the first time since she'd known him, the certainty in his voice sounded less like a decision already made, and more like a question he was genuinely glad to have answered.